So first of all, thank you. Thank you for the thought of bringing us all together and for the amazing organizational process that has put this conference together. Also, in the interest of time, I refer you to the program for all the affiliations of the people who are speaking in this session. So I'll just briefly introduce what we're up to today. The conference category that we are working under today is Ready-Made Product, which gives us the opportunity to explore some intersections between artistic creation and questions of economy, including the circumstances under which it's possible to claim authorship over everyday objects as well as experiences. And obviously one important facet of Duchamp's ready-mades is the way they set the stage for quite a wide range of artistic strategies that engage with commodities, including branded products. They also focus attention on the potentially circuitous way that authorship is asserted and secured when a work is defined in conceptual terms. I will let Olaf Nicolai speak for himself when it comes to situating how his work relates to this theme in general, but in relation to his work, I've been particularly intrigued by how he has sort of played off of the framework of the ready-made to establish certain participatory situations, including his outdoor garden installation of 25-meter running tracks based on the shapes established in Duchamp's 3 standard stoppages, or his enlargement of a Nike Air Max sneaker into an inflated sculpture. Gesine Tosin will address questions of collaboration, focusing particularly on the crucial role played by the alliance between Duchamp and Richard Hamilton. Tobias Vogt will consider the significance of certificates and contracts in the work of a number of contemporary artists whose work is informed by conceptual practices. And I will start things off by exploring certain questions that I've been researching recently about the legal constraints on the play of reference operating both within and beyond the bounds of the contemporary art world. So you can start my PowerPoint. Okay. So in relation to my own current research, I'm particularly interested in what the art historical tradition of the ready-made can tell us about the larger economic importance of ownership over intangible phenomena, and how intellectual property conventions, copyright in particular, but also trademarks and patents, relate to the ever-expanding scope of conceptually based art practices. And what I'm showing you to start us off down this path is the awning for a steak restaurant opened in New York by former basketball player Michael Jordan in 1998. And I'm doing this not to provoke thoughts of where you might want to go for dinner later tonight, which you may already be thinking about, but for the letter forms employed by the steakhouse part of the text. This font was also used for a sitcom called The Single Guy, ran on US television in the 90s. And this text here is specifically rendered in P22's Duchamp font, initially designed in 1994 by Richard Kegler as part of his master's thesis on Duchamp. And he created it by appropriating individual letters from Duchamp's handwriting. And Kegler also went on to compose a Miro font the same way. And I remember coming across this Duchamp font in a museum gift shop around that time for sale on a 3.5-inch floppy disk. And for those younger members of the audience here today, not only were there fewer fonts in general circulation at that point, but a floppy disk was a standard mode of transition if you acquired a font set. So the museum gift shop was the only strange part of this whole thing. According to a history of the Duchamp computer font posted on the P22 website at one point, Miro's grandson came across the Miro font in the Guggenheim gift shop in 1995 and turned the matter over to the Artists' Rights Association, a licensing agency that's the bête noire of all the art historians in the room. And ARS demanded that P22 stop selling both the Miro and the Duchamp font. Since P22 wasn't prepared to spend any money on lawyers' fees, they complied, even though they were convinced that Duchamp's estate would have been sympathetic to the spirit of their gesture if they could only have gone to them directly instead of going through ARS. My second exhibit is more recent. This 3D printed recreation of a chess set that Duchamp carved by hand around 1918. The 3D computer modeling was realized by Scott Kildall and Brian Serra on the basis of archival photos of the chess pieces. And they posted their files on a site called Thingiverse. And their goal was twofold: to recreate an object that they believed, and incorrectly in fact, to be lost, and to share the 3D files, printable files, as a free download. And there was a lot of interest, multiple press accounts, along with at least 300 downloads. But less than 5 months after posting the files, they received a cease and desist letter from the Duchamp estate's legal counsel, asserting the chess pieces as original works protected by French copyright law and demanding various remedies, including takedown from the file sharing site. Although Kildall and Serra believed they might have grounds for defense under US copyright law, they complied because they too did not have the resources for a legal battle. There are a number of issues that play with these two examples. One is the duration of ownership rights established by copyright regimes, which have been repeatedly extended over the course of the last century or so. The standard now shared by many jurisdictions is the lifetime of the author plus 70 years, so 2038 for any of Duchamp's original creations. Another problem is the problem of needing to hire a lawyer to assert rights that one might potentially have. Now, I'm hardly alone in my criticism of this duration as excessive, and it's largely serves corporate interests rather than those of creators. But given the current landscape, the estate lawyers for the Duchamp estate could probably make a strong argument that the 3D chess piece recreations were part of what would be categorized in legal terms as derivative work. But I am far less clear about the justification for the ARS suppression of the Duchamp font. Some countries provide copyright protection for typeface designs, while others do not, based on arguments about utility. And the US generally does not. But within the digital realm, the generation of fonts on your screens and printers via software code is subject to copyright protection. So Duchamp did not set out to create a typeface, so he did not make this as a typeface. And it appears to me that the transformation of fragments of his handwriting into a font was therefore entirely conceived and executed by Kegler. What these examples point to is the interplay, and I think in many cases the mismatch, between specific intellectual property claims and a widespread culture of appropriation and reference taking place both within and beyond the art world. And there are, as in so many areas, and here as in so many areas, Duchamp was playfully prophetic. Duchamp appended an explicit claim of copyright to the end of his 1926 anemic cinema, in this context of this film, the concluding copyright statement appears where one would typically expect to find it. But the fact that the copyright notice is joined by two other marks of authorship or authentication, a thumbprint and a signature in the name of Duchamp's alter ego, can be read as a kind of ironic excess. A far more dubious copyright notice appeared 6 years earlier, on his 1920 Fresh Widow. Specifically, the text you see on the right here is Fresh Widow, copyright Rose C'est la Vie, 1920. The object in question is a small-scale model of a standard French architectural element produced for Duchamp by a carpenter working according to his specifications. So therefore, in terms that we already discussed, very much not a ready-made. In her classic essay, Ready-Made Originals, the Duchamp Model, Molly Nesbitt considered how this work, along with various other ready-mades, and Duchamp's early images of coffee grinders, can be linked to a late 19th century French initiative requiring primary school training in technical drawing, such that this language of industry was part of a shared repertoire that Nesbitt refers to as a ready-made base. The window design that became Fresh Widow in Duchamp's hands can be directly related to standard drawing exercises, according to this argument. And therefore, Nesbitt argues that Duchamp was claiming copyright for something not only plagiarized, but connected to an entirely different realm of intellectual property, an industrial good that might be eligible for patent protection if sufficiently innovative, but not a candidate for copyright. It's also amusing for me to note, in the context of the Sturtevant retrospective at MoMA in 2015, that the copyright notice clearly didn't do anything whatsoever to discourage Sturtevant from responding to the work with one of her repetitions, the term that she preferred to appropriation. So not only did she multiply this three-dimensional object, but she also multiplied the exact inscription on the object, serving to reinforce its futility as an apparent injunction against any acts of copying. It's also difficult to see how a copyright claim could be sustained in relation to one of the central aspects of Duchamp's claim to fame, his gesture of plucking a pre-existing object from the realm of the everyday. It is therefore, I think, very telling how hard Duchamp had to work in order to establish the frameworks within which these gestures would become meaningful. In relation to the blind man issue that we've already heard discussed, Thierry Dudeuve has talked about his publication of A Rejected Fountain as putting a message in the mail. The message in Dudeuve's argument that anything could be called art, which he says did not arrive at its destination until the 1960s. Elena Filipovic's recent book, The Apparently Marginal Activities of Marcel Duchamp, really examines in detail the interval between these two poles, the initial gesture and eventual impact, paying close attention to the importance of framing and to the various curatorial operations that Duchamp undertook to establish these works as art, including, of course, the miniature museum known as the Box and Valise, which was exactly one of these curatorial maneuvers, striking for the way that it intermixed replicas of work that did exist with miniatures of such objects as Fountain, which only appeared in reproduction at the time. Now this is where my talk starts to seem like a ready-made, because so many things that are in my talk have already been presented here, just referencing the fact that most of the objects that we see as ready-mades in the museum at this point are actually specially made objects, substituting for the sculptural work, specially made sculptural work, substituting for the everyday objects. But even if it would be difficult to mount a legal argument for how the conceptual gesture of selecting an everyday object could be the basis for a copyright claim, there can be no doubt about Duchamp's success in establishing his ownership over the urinal in art historical terms, such that any artist's use of a urinal will be read in relation to his hold on the subject. And many artists have responded with forms of self-conscious reference. And I'm just showing you here the works that were included in a recent exhibition put together by Francis Naumann, where one of the really things that was striking was the fact that he included 29 different artists who made reference to the urinal, and the first thing you start noticing is how many artists were not on the list. Duchamp himself playfully acknowledged the power of this gesture at a time when it had just begun its full ascendance with his 1961 talk at the Museum of Modern Art, the quote that Annette Tietenberg has already referenced about the ready-made and the tube of paint, and the idea that after this, all ready-made products, all paintings would have to be understood as aided ready-mades. I was reminded of this claim upon encountering Olaf Nicolai's 30 Farben, shown in an exhibition, Pantone Wall Instrumented, one of a series of works where he has referenced the specific realm of colors identified through a numerical system, first developed to help with print calibration, and now part of our digital universe. Although Pantone can't lay claim to the colors themselves, they have established proprietary rights over the system according to which they are articulated via their trademarked color guides. They also issue licenses to anyone who wants to claim to be operating in accordance with Pantone standards, or as they put it on their website, Pantone approved. And I haven't had a chance to ask Olaf if he has gotten one of these licenses to be Pantone approved. In the context of trademark usage, including trade dress, we don't actually appear to be facing a shortage of color options at this point. But I was interested to read about the depletion of words and phrases available to businesses attempting to establish trademark branding. Apparently, language is a finite resource, and at least for marketing purposes, a lot of the good bits have already been taken and claimed. Within the art world, there are obvious ways that copyright limitations have a direct impact on activities, including the dangers faced by artists engaged with strategies of appropriation, as well as controls, including over-interpretation, exercised by certain high-profile artists and their estates. But I also want, as my sort of final thoughts, to think about the issue in broader terms. A dystopian reading of Duchamp's attempts to lay claim to certain common or once common objects might lead us, for example, to the Internet of Things, sometimes referred to as the Internet of Things one doesn't own, based on the degree to which full possession is circumscribed by underlying limitations or access to proprietary software, as well as a lack of control over what happens to data that they collect. More broadly, it is interesting to consider how this particular, even peculiar trajectory of artistic authorship can potentially help us think productively and critically about the network of ownership claims over the intangible that has been established through intellectual property laws central to many aspects of modern culture and economic life. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for the invitation to speak here. I was a bit surprised to get the invitation to talk about ready-mades, and as Annette Tietenberg already stated it, I don't see my works as ready-mades, but there must be somehow a relation to it, and it was making me thinking about what can be the relation of the ready-made. I'm deeply convinced that there is a strong influence on Duchamp of my work just by dealing with his work. And the last time I had a talk to give together with Thomas Gerst to make it a bit more entertaining, I produced this kind of chocolate hat, which is the silhouette of Marcel Duchamp rotating, what you can see. The rotating thing is like a futuristic technique which was specially used and got very famous to recreate the head of Mussolini. And the chocolate thing, everybody who's familiar with Duchamp knows how important it is to him. And so we were eating the chocolate, of course, during the talk with the audience together, so that we had a bit of joy and fun. I will tell you a little bit more about this later. Now I start with the sneaker which was used for advertising this kind of conference here. And it is, of course, not a ready-made in a very strong sense. But what I found very interesting is, why is the ready-made so interesting and productive for an artist? And it is the method which allows you to produce with the ready-made. And what exactly is this method? What are the strings? And this I try to illustrate with the works what I did, where I see kind of strings. This Nike sneaker has the title The 90s. And what you see is surrounded by a text by Sadie Smith, which was published in Face magazine. And the text is called A Short Catalog of Things That You Think You Want. This text was published in the birthday anniversary of Face magazine. I don't know if anybody remembers that. Face magazine is the magazine in the 90s where the young British art scene was merging culture, commodification, glam, pop, everything. So Face was that what Damien Hirst now is standing for at that time. And Sadie Smith was a regular contributor to this magazine. And she was extremely critical about the magazine itself. So when there was the birthday issue, she wrote this text, which is a text about Nike sneakers as well, and people, why they want Nike sneakers. So she was ending it. In the end, the new trainers you want, and you don't try to tell me different. Well, the good news is you don't only think you want them, you really want them. Despite their 3 months lifespan, Nike's profit in the children who make them. Because they are beautiful, because they are art. And as we have to learn these 20 years, art will you make do shit like that 9 times out of 10. So when you are as an artist working in this field and you are more or less quoting and you try to reflect this process where you are in, your kind of production, you have no other choice than to quote these products, what you are surrounded by. The quotation of these products is a tricky thing so long as it is stated that they have copyrights on these products. But when they state they are cultural items, and I want to talk about culture, then I have to use them. So there is no way for me not to use them. So there is a totally different case than a copyright case. So that's why when I produced the Nike sneaker, the company in the beginning refused to produce it because they asked me for the permission from Nike to produce it. And I said, of course I have it, and then we did it. Of course I didn't have it, but Nike was coming and asked if they can exhibit it in Nike Town. And then I said, no, I don't think this is the right context for this piece. And they were fine. It was not a problem. So you see, but surround this sneaker by this text, what does it do? I mean, there are two quotes coming together. What is very important are the titles for me. The titles of this text is a text by Sadie Smith, published in the birthday issue of Face magazine, called A Short Catalog of Things That You Think You Want. So it's very important that you understand where these products are coming from when you want to see what is happening. It's like you face two quotes, and because you very exactly play with the references of these codes, you can enlighten something what in these codes by themselves is not there. This is something what I'm very interested in. For example, reading this text, how it was installed, you have to circulate around this Nike sneaker like this is a totem. But when you had kids, and there were a lot of kids in this exhibition, that was the place where they could play around, because it is, you can go in, you can play with it. So it is also about the economy of seduction, which is behind the economy, what we're talking about when we talk about copyright system. Because only, as Sadie Smith told it, you want it. And you want it because it's beautiful. And what is that? Beautiful and what you want. So this is a little bit one thing from this Nike sneaker where I see quotation. Here, it's a tricky thing if this is a ready-made or not. It would really fit to the description what a ready-made could be. It is to produce energy, and it is installed in a turbine hall in an old one. And instead of producing energy, it's consuming energy. I just landed it from a company, we installed it, and it's cutting through the roof. The title of the piece, and after that, it returned to the company. I mean, I didn't keep it. and the roof was closed again. The title of the piece is Constantine. I mean, each piece needs a name. So, and I gave it Constantine. Of course, it has to do with Constantine Brancusi. So again, what is here with this product, which is a given product, what can this product tell you? I mean, what can it give you? So the first thing, how does it look? So just study the figure. And the quotation of the figure is that the shape of the form is a mathematical curve. And this mathematical curve is very, very close to that what later Brancusi was doing with Bird in Space. But Brancusi was stating that he shaped this by emotions. He never used mathematics to shape this thing. So where is the relation between the mathematical curve? Because it's a mathematical curve, the Brancusi Bird in Space. You can recreate it, but he never used mathematics to do it. So how is this relation between this emotion and this kind of mathematical pattern? That is one thing. The other thing is, in the middle, the Constantine, it is this piece, when it was imported to the United States, was stuck in the costumes, because the costume wants to tax it not as art, they wanted to tax it as a piece of metal, because the tax was higher. So Brancusi went to court. He wanted to really have a proof that this is a piece of art. And it took quite long, but he managed. So that this is a piece of art. Again, what makes a piece of art? Is it just the authorship, that it was made by the author? And then the last thing after the name is where it was exhibited, in a turbine hall. And this is another kind of economy, what we see today, that the old industrial economy is used for cultural economy. That these old buildings now are turned into museums, that they are turned into consumptions for tourists, that you design a totally different economy with these things as well. So all these kind of aspects of different kind of economies came together in this kind of piece just by quoting. And this is also something what I found very interesting with Duchamp, that the ready-made is in a very, very long tradition, a rhetorical long tradition of quotations. What is a quotation? When you look in the history of quotation, then Duchamp for sure was aware that he is standing in this kind of history. And it is a crossroad, because the moment that the original is appearing in the 19th century, it is disappearing at the time when Duchamp started to think about his ready-mades, because industrial production is erasing that what you call original in the traditional sense. And another piece which is working with a given, which is not a made, was a piece for the Venice Biennial, where I just asked the Venice Biennial to advertise falling stars. So there was a poster all about in Venice, and it has "Welcome to the Tears of St. Lawrence." And when you follow the instruction, you see a falling star. So it's a very simple phenomenon. These are the Tears of St. Lawrence. It is in the beginning of August. It's a kind of meteorite rain which comes. And to collectors, it was also sold, this piece, to a collection. And they do now all the time stargazing in August. I never intended that you have to do stargazing. And I don't also know where here is really the piece. I just say, do this and you will see that. The interesting thing for me was in this case that two collectors asked me, how could you make the NASA doing this for you? So, and of course it sounds in the beginning a bit strange, but they were very correct. In the moment when you pay attention to something, it is in the realm of the made. Perception creates immediately something that you are not out there anymore. So you can assume it. This is the base of consumption. This is the base of every production, that you see it, that you perceive it. And so in this base, you know, the kind of romantic aspect of the thing that makes you consuming. So you go to stargazing, you pay the entrance fee for something what you can see worldwide everywhere. You don't need to pay an entrance fee for that. You have not to go to Venice. So I published a little book where you understood what is it, where you also find the observation places where you can see it at what time the best. Then you have the universal time, so you can calculate it all through the time, I mean also in the future. So it is not fixed in space and in time, and you can just do it anyhow. And then there was a glossary, what has to do with meteors and falling stars. And yeah, and this is one of my favorite objects. These are the so-called image non-cooperative objects. So the NASA are calling it the non-cooperative objects. This is all the trash what is flying around. because you need to calculate this trash, what you cannot influence when you send up a satellite, that you not hit trash. And some of the meteorites, what you think are meteorites, is just falling trash. And also you find a lot of nice stories about why you think you can send wishes up when you see a meteorite. That is because when the gods had to clean their house, so they opened the door that the trash is going out, and then it's the falling stars. So you can send up a wish which is going into the door. That was the belief. On the other side, the Egyptians believed that for each being on earth, there is a representation in the sky. There is a star, and the falling star is somebody is dying. So you see how these phenomena are culturally embedded. And also when you think about image theory, the stars are the first thing what human beings are seeing as an image, and they don't know what it is. They cannot go behind, they have no concept what they see, they just have to make a theory what they see. And making the theory is one of the most important things what also in the Duchampian work is essential. This is a ready-made in the sense that I found a postcard, and I was invited to do public artwork in Naples, and the city ran out of money, and I said, don't worry, I do the piece anyhow. So I print this postcard again and put on the back side this. And a month later, somebody sent me this. I just was going through the city and deposited the card and cars, and that was happening then a month later. So I had no intention that really people start to park there. It was a strike by the cab drivers. And the city council was later quoting that they heard also of a German artist who want to transform this place into a parking lot, and that they really have to do something about it now. So, and one of the pieces where this activity, what I call theory, is getting into the picture is this piece, La Boule de Voyant. It is a piece in the form of a telenovela, and what you get is nothing else than this little kind of leporello. And this telenovela has 10 episodes, and each of the episodes have a name. They are characterized by a color and a date where the episodes are happening and the space where they are happening. So there are 10 places all around the world. There are dates, and these are shops, garages, different places. And this is the backside. When you advertise something, you have also to make kind of reference, what is the episode like. So there was everything except the story. And when you would travel and you would go through these places, something would happen. So the first episode was in Venice, and the TV went to this little store and asked the people, oh, do you know that you're part of an artwork? And they were quite clever. They reacted like, yeah, we are all part of an artwork. So it was absolutely not clear if there's anybody got an instruction or not. It's totally unimportant for me if you know that or if you don't know that. The most important thing is how you deal with that you don't know or you know. So this kind of activity leads also back to this piece, what has this title, what is a quote by Duchamp itself. And like this year in Venice, we just made a breakfast with it, and so we melted it, and all the people got it to drink. And so funny it is, what you do there is a technique which is deeply religious. It's the Eucharistie. So this is creating the symbol. This is creating the sign. This is the pact that the sign is down on earth, and that there is a guarantee that the sign has a meaning. So in the relation between sign and meaning, the reference, that is exactly the thing what comes into crisis around the time when Duchamp is thinking about a ready-made. When you read Wittgenstein's diaries, what he's writing in 1914 when he is in war, he is asking all the time about the role of the negation in a sentence. How can it be that we can say something is not? And what is it representing when it says something is not there? What is the reference of something what is not? So the reference between the sign and the meaning is deeply in question, and it is not a clear reference anymore. Frege is stating that at the same time. And there's one writer, what Duchamp was paying tribute to, Marcel, which created a kind of universe out of signs where the reference is extremely blurring. When you read the book, what was published after his death, how he was writing his texts, it's an amazing door opening to the fact that, not like Foucault, who was writing about Marcel, that he is dealing with the question that the base of every language is that there are less signs than objects which have to be assigned. Marcel was turning the thing upside down. He wanted to create more signs than there are objects. And that is something what I found very interesting, because it is opening an extremely productive field. One of the interesting references is the literature group Oulipo, that they create methods of writing which are like automatic writing. Harry Matthews, Georges Perec, and they have Duchamp as a member of their group. And it is exactly about how you play with references. In Wittgenstein's diaries, there is a quote where he's thinking about Newton and why Newton is describing with his mechanic the world. Is it really describing the world? And he says, you know, he is putting a net of squares above the thing, and it fits very well. But you could also choose a net of triangles. It would also fit. So that means, like Georges Perec, when he was writing his novel where the letter E is never used, it is a story which is functioning. So imagine you would have a perception which would work totally different than your perception right now. Would the reality in front of you be a different one? And that is the question which I find the most productive one when you talk about ready-mades. Thank you.
So, exploring forms of authorship, I would like to focus on the artistic practice of collaboration. More precisely, I'm interested in how artists declare authorship within the framework of collaboration. Going back to the 50s and 60s, I propose to take a closer look at the interaction between the British artists Richard Hamilton and Marcel Duchamp and point to forms of consensual appropriation. Hamilton collaborated with several artists, notably with Dieter Roth, but in the context of the discussion today, let me concentrate on his interrelation with Duchamp and his work. Richard Hamilton is an artist whose practice includes the use of images originating in popular culture, the appropriation of mass media imagery. In a technically elaborate way, his paintings, especially from the 1960s, question the power of post-war consumerism images, what they reveal and hide, and how they disclose our desires and our fears. Hamilton's large body of prints deals with the topics of the original and the copy, and the dissolution of the seemingly clear distinction between the two. All the more so, since Hamilton prolongs the use of already made images into his printmaking by using his originals as source material for his prints. His exploration into ready-made imagery is paralleled by a deep involvement with Duchamp's work, which doesn't come as a surprise, does it? In collaborating with Duchamp, Hamilton contrives subtle ways to claim authorship while reverberating questions of artistic identity. There are two interventions in particular that offer us a closer look into these questions: Hamilton's typo translation of Duchamp's notes and his reconstruction of the bright strip bear by her bachelor's even, the large glass. In the mid-1950s, Hamilton decides, with Duchamp's approval, to translate the notes of the Boîte Verte, the Green Box, which had been published in 1934 in an edition of 320. The loose form of the notes, notably the fluid medium of language, opens a space for Hamilton to conceive and produce the Green Book, and affiliates his artistic practice and name with Duchamp's work. Duchamp had assembled this selection of his handwritten notes to form a literary companion to the large glass. Yet the notes, as facsimiles put together in a box without any given sequence, do not provide a linear narrative to the large glass. Quite the contrary. Duchamp's notes are spiry threads of thoughts, enigmatic, ambivalent, and contradictory. Their multi-layered, volatile character is mirrored by their visual complexity. The notes are often underlined in different colors, complemented by small drawings, and have all kinds of marks, annotations, and differences in handwriting. So here we see on the left hand a note from Duchamp, and on the right side Hamilton's type of translation. When Hamilton conceives his translation, he not only aims to translate the French into English, but he recognizes the necessity to transfer these handwritten and drawn peculiarities into print form, and comes up with the term typo translation. In close collaboration with Duchamp, Hamilton decides on the sequential arrangement of the notes and brings Duchamp to rethink and specify those of his notes which are unclear to Hamilton, who, being fairly unfamiliar with French, had declared himself in the course of his typo translation as monolingual. It is specifically through language, through the process of translating into English into his mother tongue, that Hamilton appropriates the notes and inscribes himself into Duchamp's work. The typo translation doesn't aim to eliminate the paradoxes and ambiguities of the notes, yet they gain a further legibility. With its textual and graphic qualities, Hamilton designs his book to be a primer to the large glass, and therefore to offer another look on Duchamp's work. Duchamp's Green Box becomes Hamilton's Green Book, published in 1960. Duchamp calls this active process in the frame of the collaboration transubstantiation, and Hamilton son grand déchiffreur, his grand decipherer. In reconstructing Duchamp's large glass, Hamilton goes a step further. In the course of preparing a Duchamp retrospective for the Tate Gallery, to be opened in 1966, he decides not to borrow Ulf Linde's previous reconstruction made for an exhibition at the Stedelijk Museum in 1961, but to attempt one himself. Using his Green Book as a manual, he retraces Duchamp's thinking on his way to making the large glass, exploring as much his notes as his experimentation with various techniques, such as the use of lead and paint on glass. Quote Hamilton, "To reconstruct procedures rather than imitate the effects of action." This time, it is not through language, but via hands-on technical processes, by recreating Duchamp's techniques, that Hamilton affiliates himself with Duchamp. However, once again, he leaves his own mark by modifying some of the production processes when he finds it necessary, and by integrating an additional element. He mounts his reconstruction on semicircular feet, referring to another of Duchamp's works, glider containing a watermill and neighboring metals. Once completed, Hamilton's reconstruction of the large glass is signed by both artists, and Duchamp adds "pour copie conforme," for a faithful replica, on the lower part of the glass. When the reconstruction partially breaks in 1984, and part of it is being remade by restorers under Hamilton's supervision, he insists on integrating the unbroken piece with both their signatures, Hamilton's and Duchamp's, into the restored version. Since then, Hamilton's large glass has been permanently on show at the Tate Modern. Entitled "The Bride Strip Bare by Bachelor's Even," its label refers to the work's dates as 1915-23, reconstruction by Richard Hamilton 1965-66, lower panel remade 1985. Both Hamilton's Green Book and his reconstruction of the large glass have deliberately blurred in a fine and subtle way the idea of authorship and the ascription of artistic practice. When Hamilton's large glass was exhibited in Duchamp's retrospective of the Tate Gallery in 1966, it was publicly discussed whether it was an original by Hamilton on show rather than a work by Duchamp. When Hamilton integrates the reconstruction of the large glass in his own retrospective in 2014, the entanglement of the seemingly distinct line between the artists' identities got its ultimate twist. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to respond in a way to Sadhana Fif's certificates and Olaf Nicolai's postcards. In 2008, an empty postcard holder was exhibited at Esther Schipper Gallery in Berlin. The wreck's generally mobile, anthropomorphic shape was presented immobilized and stripped to the bones. Artistically contextualized, it undoubtedly resembled Marcel Duchamp's early Readymades, the Roue de Bicyclette, and the empty bottle rack porte-bouteille. But unlike Duchamp's authorized editions, which were initially individually made, as we heard before, signed Marcel Duchamp, dated 1964 and numbered, the industrially produced rack not only lacks postcards, but also the respective inscriptions on its surface. If you buy an identical object for the usual price of €100 online, you still won't be able to claim ownership of it as a work of art. Because in this case, the authenticating signature is on a separate certificate. The text typed on this seemingly non-artistic, standardized sheet of A4 paper states that this certificate of authenticity ownership is necessary for owning Seal Floyer's Wish You Were Here. Only with that paper is the buyer in possession of one edition. The colored writing, the German word Kopie, was added here by the gallery in order to protect the original document. Today, I would like to point to the following questions. In what way do types of authentication like this become meaningful in contemporary art? What status do they assume not only as legally or economically relevant documents, but in particular with regard to their artistically determined syntax and semantics as text images? Certificates of authenticity are a well-known phenomenon in the history of art. Within the art market, they can be used to retrospectively evaluate the attribution of an artwork with the aid of professional expertise. In doing so, they take on the function of a byproduct or parergon. This traditional authentication of arts leads, I would argue, to authentication as art. The formal and functional distinctions between the work and its byproducts become at least ambivalent. So further questions are, do the specific practices of authentication reveal anything about the general boundary shift within the temporal, formal, and functional relationship between the work and the byproduct, the ergon and the parergon in particular? Do they even interrelate with changes in the definition of art in general? A certificate shows what is commonly not shown, what is invisible or even hidden, something that has gained new importance in the visual arts in the age of digitalization. Martha Buskirk's seminal writings, not only on copyright, but also on certificates, are of special interest here. As every work of art requires some form of authentication, this itself has become a field of experimentation for the artists themselves. In the last 20 years, eToy, Pierre Icke and Philippe Parenot or Adrian Piper even integrated unilateral assertory certificates issued after the fact or bilateral promissory contracts negotiated by two parties beforehand in their work. Recent examples shown at the last Documenta include Sokol Bekiri or Irina Hajduk, all operating within this field in various different ways. In addition to Seal Floyer, I would like to focus on a work by Maria Eichhorn, not on the Maria Eichhorn Aktiengesellschaft, which is a major work on the subject of contractualization in the name of art, but rather on a more marginal one. The work itself was displayed on the ground floor at the Kunsthaus Bregenz, next to the cash register. It functioned as both the beginning and the end of Eichhorn's solo exhibition. While a postcard holder that Floyer stripped bare of its goods was in a way familiar to visitors wandering through museum shops, Eichhorn's wooden object posed more of an enigma. On the one hand, it resembled a cage for a small animal. On the other hand, the delicate, symmetrical design was so unusual as to confirm the suspicions that this might be in fact a work of art. Suspicions that were initially aroused by the plinth and the context of an exhibition. Paratexts such as wall labels or leaflets reveal the title Eichhörnchenkäfig, squirrel cage. Floyer's title, Wish You Were Here, recalls not only the standard message to absent friends, but also the poignant melody of the Pink Floyd song, which was an enormous commercially success, despite or perhaps because of criticizing the music industry. Eichhorn's self-referential, tautological choice of name runs counter to any such far-reaching associations, but nonetheless also could function as institutional critique. However, this emblem of the caged artist, whose proper name is rendered a diminutive Eichhörnchen, was available for €6,000 as a Kunsthaus Bregenz edition. The sculpture also comes along with a certificate. Its header is dominated by the words Kunsthaus Bregenz and a photograph of the cage that corresponds to the logo of the institution. This photo replaces the central sentence of Floyer's certificate stating this signed certificate together with the aforementioned components and documentation/installation instructions constitute ownership of the work Wish You Were Here. End of quote. This sentence is missing in Eichhorn's example for a good reason, for she did not take an industrial product and declare it a work of art, but instead commissioned the carpenter Johannes Nitsch to create 11 reproductions of a squirrel cage. The 19th century original forms part of the collection of the Angelica Kauffmann Museum near Bregenz. Again, uniting aspects of Duchamp's edited bottle rack and bicycle wheel, the reproduction is handcrafted after the fact. It refers not only to a past curiosity of the Alpine region, but also offers conceptual punchlines for the present day. Angelica Kauffmann, English merchant, is one of the most famous female 18th century artists. Her name already carries the connotation of mercantilism. Eichhorn's edition plays with the idea of a Trojan horse. Standing next to the museum's cashiers, the Eichhörnchenkäfig unites a site-specific reference to Bregenz, a feminist reference to the artist's self, and an economic reference to outsourcing. Finally, another example of authentication by Olaf Nicolai. You see his signature with the place and the date on a postcard that presumably shows a photograph of his neon sign, "Hello there, hell here," on the other side. This postcard could be considered a mere autograph because it is auctioned by eBay at the moment for €26. But it could also be considered as another parergon, another way of certifying the postcard depicting an original Nicolai. Apart from the original certificate that probably accompanies the neon sign, it is another place for the artist's signature in the net around his work. The light handwriting's visual attractiveness is close to a pencil drawing as a very traditional artistic medium. But it also contrasts with the heavy-handed writing, "Hello there, hell here," on the front. In conclusion, I would like to sketch some aspects of a potential topology and typology of authentication. In all the examples, the signature and the signed paper, including paper rulings, types of writings, fonts, and logos, can, due to potential plurality of authors, indicate a network of producers and reproducers. Even if a work is authenticated orally, see Tino Segal, for example, or written authentication is kept locked up, it does not dematerialize. One could discuss even the example of Olaf Nicolai's autograph within the discourse of art as currency or art as derivative, as Hito Steil, David Joselet, or Mackenzie Walk have suggested. Every authentication seems to affect both what is authenticated and what authenticates it. For example, Floyer's X and inclusion of the printed material designed to be written on, be it the postcard or the certificate, demonstrates that the actual work can become a placeholder for its actual byproduct. And this is probably not only true for post-conceptual art. Attributions of status, this is the work, this is the byproduct, therefore become less clear, an effect that applies in both directions. A buyer might acquire a laconically designed but nonetheless signed certificate rather than the industrially produced object made for display. The question, what is art and what is non-art, what is archival material and what is an exhibit, what is to be hidden and what is to be made visible, are therefore subject to negotiation. Thank you.
So let me just, first of all, thank you to the panel members. And then I want to start, at the beginning of the last discussion, Lars Blunk began us with the question of delegation. I think here we're thinking about collaboration, perhaps, questions of collaboration, but also questions about when is the work contained or uncontained, essentially the very process of defining what might constitute the work. And this idea of also the artist's process of definition and claiming and defining. So I think maybe this would be a thread that we could think about initially, would be this work of definition that happens around the work, but might actually be the work. And then other parts of that thread are different kinds of contexts. Obviously, move into a museum, display on a pedestal is one kind of context. Economics are another kind of context. Olaf, you were talking before we started the panel a little bit about the surrounding economics. So maybe we can think about those questions of what happens around the work, but might nonetheless be central to the work. And I don't know if Olaf, if you would like to start us with the idea of the economics around that you were talking with me about a little bit before we started.
Yeah, I maybe want to come back to the aspect of the religious aspect, what I was highlighting, which has to do with the framework. When we talk about the certificates and all these things, it's a deep sense of believing that all these things make sense. And without this framework of believing in this sense, the whole thing is bullshit. So this is something what you have to see. It is like the social bind, what is created by being part of a system. So we should not talk about this kind of art system as it is something what we put in question. We are in it and it is a given. It's like a given for somebody in the 16th century that this religious world is a given thing. So we can see it also from the outside, and then the whole tones shift. But this makes it put only some questions in economical terms, because if I buy it for 100 euros on eBay, or if I have the certificate, what does it make a difference for the object? It makes a huge difference for the owner. But not to cash it later, that is a side effect. It is a deep relation between the person and the object which is created. And where is this ability to create this relation coming from? You know, the fetishization or the commodification. What is that? I mean, and this is what I'm very interested in. And that is also where I think when you talk about the economical aspects, then behind this economy there is another economy on work. And this is the economy of desire. That you really want to be in that. And this is an economy what you not have really access to. But it is an economy which is today in use to create fields of economy, that economy is going still running. That you can have an economy still, you know, I mean, as Frederick Jameson once put it, we are in the state of where the unconscious is the resource of the material what we work today with is the unconscious, but how can be the unconscious the material? But it is, in fact. And that is what I'm very interested in as an artist, because I work in this field. And also when you showed the piece with this, in German there's a nice term, Gefälligkeitssignatur. It's coming from literature, you know, when you sign a book. And this is something, how you deal with that. I mean, and I have a good friend who is working in an auction house, he's running an auction house, and he says they guessed that 60% of the signatures they have in the auction are fake, of contemporary arts. But nobody talks about it. And there are a lot of hidden, really, have people who deliver all the time these things in, and they know it's a huge black market in this case as well. So, and that is, I find super interesting aspects as well. But it's maybe not that much interesting in a way of talking about the references in an academic term.
Well, when I showed these two examples, on the one hand Silfra and the other Maria Eichhorn, I was also interested in the, even the objects were in a way similar and you can compare them, so academically perfect. Or there's a difference in how the certificates are distributed. If you remember, there was this red word copy put on the document. This was just a scan. This was sent to me by the gallery, and it is. I was not allowed to reproduce it in a book. And on the other hand, you have Maria Eichhorn, whose gallery and herself, she has no problem in spreading this and reproducing the certificate. And so now, I think this is a difference you can probably make between artists who are more interested in collaboration and sharing and artists who are probably more interested in this religious aspect that, Olaf, you were talking about. I mean, this is probably, this could be one distinction you can make.
And you were thinking about a Hamilton that maybe is not a Hamilton, a work that might not be a work, or that might be somebody else's work.
Well, I mean, it was a very, very interesting. Is this working? Yeah, a very interesting kind of twist that was, being made by both of them, in fact. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that Duchamp would have been thrilled if he would have known that, all of a sudden his large glass was, this kind of launched this discussion. Okay, is this a Hamilton or is it Duchamp? But what I'm really kind of, and it's kind of difficult to link myself into this certificate, like in contemporary art practice, but I think I was really interested, or I am very interested in this process of how you internalize like artistic processes. And I think what really triggered me was this, the phenomena of language. And I mean, certificates are, it's through language, it's words, it's not, it's not material. So, and on the other hand, and this was a very, very fine, thing that Hamilton did through translating. By the way, when I saw that, at first Duchamp was saying it was tout fait, and through like the transcultural translation, he found the term ready-made. So I thought, well, there's so many things that through language and through the translation from one language into the other, all of a sudden there's a different meaning and a certain like appropriation of things. And then the other thing what really interested me was that the appropriation through technique, through hand-on. I mean, to really like go into the material and kind of internalize like an artwork through making. I mean, like literally, like I mean, I talked about this with Hamilton, and he was like so thrilled by redoing, like literally redoing these things. So this is what I was very much interested, like language and technique.
So, do any of you have questions for other members of the panel before I open this up to the larger audience? Or should I just let the audience get to go?
I do have another thing that kind of links this panel to the one before,
yes.
That is the phenomena of delegating. So I think that might be a question that you know might be interested. I mean, how is this delegation thing? I mean, it's a circuit. So how does that? What rhythm has that in?
I mean, for me, the delegation is a very simple part of production. I mean, I see it as a method. I just use it, or yeah, I have no problem of delegating. Or I don't think of authorship in this case. I mean, it's really something I want to make a thing possible, and that is very more interesting for me than the authorship, which is the result at the end. I want to see these things, or I want to see what happens when I initiate something. I find it more interesting to throw a stone into the water and see what does the stone in the water, or to remember that there was a stone ever thrown into the water and you can't see it anymore. But the water is different. So does this has an effect? I'm interested really in these kind of possibilities of navigating in a field which seems extremely restricted and very clearly lined up and reflected. And what you said about the box with all the notations to the class, it's an amazing thing when you read the whole literature about it, how they try to make sense of it. And the only sense what it makes it is a documentation of a person. It is Marcel Duchamp's writing. That is the sense of it. But it is a nice thing is everything else who tries to translate it in something else wants to consume it. And I find it so interesting thing that there is a slight chance to produce something what is, you cannot consume. You know, that you can, for a slight moment, stop this consumption process. And it is linked to something which is unique, what in the old terms is all the time called the inconsumable, the individual. That the person who you are. That, I mean, that is only something what you can be. I mean, that is the question what we deal today with. Is this really the case, or is it not the case? Is this now given up? And that I found extremely interesting with Duchamp, that he had these moments where he produces things where the consumption stops. I mean, you can make sense of it, of course, but you have so many opportunities to make exactly the opposite sense of it at the same time, you know. And that is something what I found fascinating, that he also didn't make comments so much, or when he made comments, when you read all the comments about Readymade, they are so self-contradictory. I mean, they are like crazy, and it is interesting to see that narrations are not adapting to that what you call life. And that life and narration are in a kind of contradictory constellation, hopefully. And that is something what I'm very interested in. Maybe it's a very romantic aspect.
Let's open this up to any questions. Yes, there is a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to point that some fields are interesting for the auditor, but not very clear. For example, Olaf Nicolai described that there could be more signs and objects of the to which signs are attributed. Similarly, we can imagine that there are more objects that we don't perceive than objects that we perceive because of time limitations and space limitations, because we need time to go through space. But actually in our daily life, we are often in a situation in which Duchamp was, where most of objects are just technical objects or for use, while nothing attracts us to them and nothing makes us flee from them. So we are not having a dynamic, spatial dynamic of attraction or repulsion. So it's anesthetic, which is the fun, what Duchamp in some of his declaration made fun of. So let's make the anesthetic objects, let's become aware of anesthetic objects and science them. But what I mean is that one of his ideas might be to be able to recognize ourselves in our state of non-movement of attraction or repulsion, to recognize, let's say, to appropriate the infinity of space that is the substrate of movement from attraction and repulsion and stuff like this. The second was that I don't understand what, I just checked mutt, the word M-U-T-T, and it means dog, mongrel, bastard, or stupid man. So I was like, why don't I hear that mutt means dog? And you know, dogs mark their territory, spatial territory, ownership of territory through urine. And so the tree has nothing, is anesthetic to the dog. The interest is when it becomes his tree that marks his spatial territory. And it's like, I thought about the Mannequin piece. You know, there's no fountain if you just have the receptacle. You need the small guy. So, for example, the fountain takes his title only in the relationship between the emitter of urine and the receptor of urine. So the funny thing is that he describes in his fountain the situation of the artwork as an interaction between an emitter and a receptor, an emitter of projection. Each one projects something, his own story on an object, and each one has seen another artwork, you know. But the most impressive idea would be to say infinite space and infinite amounts of objects are anesthetic to us as individuals, but we can still say we know they are there. It's also ours.
Would you like to jump in and respond?
About the mud thing, I can't say so much. This is better to Thomas Gerst, because he was very into this kind of the title of the. But the idea of the perception, that is exactly what I was highlighting when I was talking about the Tears of St. Lawrence. When is something appearing in the field of perception? When do you not pay attention to something? I think you're talking about paying attention. I mean, I really mean perception.
Usually, when something are neither attractive, neither repulsive.
Yeah.
And when we manage to become aware, when we become aware of something that is absolutely not repulsive and absolutely not attractive to us, anesthetic, then something strange happened. It's as if we became aware of space. Scientifically there is space here, but I just use it, you know. But if we become aware of something fully anesthetic and that is also material, then we are confronted to the dynamic or the joke that Duchamp made. He was like,
yeah, this is exactly
so
the point. The threshold when you become aware.
Yeah,
what is behind that?
And how can you become aware of what is not conditioned by culture? Maybe I'm attracted to this type of stuff and repulsed by this stuff, but it's a ready-made stuff from my culture.
This is the question what I have.
How can I become, you know?
This is the question what I have. How can you be aware of something what is not given in your way of perception? How can you see something?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and this becomes exploration somehow,
or of course.
Pioneer.
We can both look in white snow and we will see a lot very different. But when you protocol it, you found out that in each time people see very similar things. You know, you not have to see in a movie to dream like movies.
What?
Yeah, because all the people around you who have seen movies act like movies, so it is there. Perception is not something what only works in the field of the conscious.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I mean.
So I'm missing something, something in anesthetic in my mind. The other thing that was strange to me is that the situation of the tree hiding the forest. When we say, oh, this piece of furniture was fully ready-made when I could order it, but now that I have multiple choices for this car or this piece of furniture, it's not a ready-made anymore. But isn't it just the trees hiding the forest? Because each option is a ready-made. So, I mean, it's not because there is a sprawling, bubbling, ready-made world that there's no ready-made anymore. But yeah, this is another thing. Yeah, but you mean we act, we are conditioned by movies, for example, or by culture, and it will make us project certain things within certain circumstances?
No, I don't think that you project. It would be it is to subject object when you think about projection.
Yeah,
it is you. You are the medium already.
You
It's
mean
in you.
the object doesn't
There
exist?
is no outside. It is in
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
But it's a very long discussion now how to think about it. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, and also there is this
Maybe
one point that you described, but I don't know if I bubbled about it, is that we might have a neutral point in ourselves that is pre-movement of desire or repulsion. You know, I mean, we have to go into the gear of attraction or repulsion, but before we go into the gears, because I don't know, then we might be in a state where we can have a continuum between the special self, sub-movement, and the special, and as a subject, and the object that is also a sub-movement, you know, sub-magnetic. And so then only the object is space and the subject is space, or the perceptor, you know?
I guess, but I think it's a long discussion because you turn into the believing.
So I've just gotten the warning that we have 5 minutes. So I think I will open it up if anyone else would like to jump into the, yes.
I have a question about certificates. So I guess it's mostly addressed to Tobias, but I guess not necessarily. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts about the blockchain technology and how could that work in certificates? So, because we do face this situation where a certificate is quite often used as some sort of an ersatz of an artwork, that mostly with some sort of performative works where artists were very particular about not wanting the certificate to be the object displayed, nevertheless that happens so. And there's also all that fetish value that, well, sometimes, as you pointed, intentionally, but sometimes unintentionally, is attributed to the document. And then there's, of course, the question of the fraud, but also the conceptual level of what the certificate is. And if we could imagine switching to some sort of a blockchain technology with that, I mean, then, necessarily the safety of such a certificate would increase, but also the whole conceptual background of that would change. You could, for instance, have all the, I don't know, instructions, but you could also imagine a certificate that expires, or certificates that expires if a person in a possession of an artwork does something that has been, well, written into contract, could not be done. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, this is, so just listening to your question, I think the audience already got an idea of the diverse possibilities there are when you use certificates. And I think this, the two examples that I showed today are just a very special area within that field. And you mentioned performance work. I mentioned in my response Tino Segal, who's famous for his oral certification. And so I don't know anything about the blockchain industry. Probably you could comment on this a little bit so that I got an idea what this means.
Well, I guess guess we have here people that know about that way better, and I guess Simon could explain us much better how how the blockchain exactly works. But that maybe would be too long for 5 minutes. Yeah. It comes down. It basically, the safety of it lays in the fact of endless reproduction of the certificate, so you can't falsify it because you will never be able to falsify everything.
Okay. But this is the link between IT technology and artistic practice, if I got an idea of it. Is that correct?
Well, I was more thinking about, you also mentioned the question, in the panel was also the question of the ownership mentioned. So I guess that a lot of technicalities that are related to that conceptual possession of an artwork could be solved with this technology, or this technology could potentially give possibilities that would, for instance, make an artwork expiring at a certain time. You could theoretically also have a clause in the contract that would make the certificate expiring if something changes, like whatever. I
mean, what I showed today were very traditional forms of certifications or authentications of artworks. And as you mentioned, there have been in the conceptual art, there was this field of exploring certification or authentication in a way started, and even then there were different ways of authenticating a work. For example, Daniel Beren, he had this avertissement. This was a warning. This has to be signed by the person who bought the object, and not a certificate that he issued, for example. But as far as the newer technology or the latest technology is concerned, I'm really curious about these things, but I was more concentrating on the, let's say, the beginning or the post-conceptual art, which is already 20 years ago. I
mean, it's interesting to think the degree.
Yes. Just one sentence about the last one. I found this blockchain question very interesting. Thank you. Who was it? Yeah, thanks. And I just wanted to relate back to another question which was discussed at the same time. Certificates came out for conceptual art. That was how to deal with video art and digital art, because there you could get a copy which would look the same as the original in a way. And this is more the track I think you should look for if you're interested in this problem, how this was solved in a long, complicated negotiation process, where at first artists working with video and with digital data were reluctant to give a copy to anybody out of fear that it would be circulating without their permission. And now they put it all on YouTube, because it is getting clearer that it's the same as with the postcard stamped by Seal Floyer. You need the certificate to own it. And they want people to see it on YouTube and then to buy it, So you can see it anytime on YouTube, and you still don't own it. And this kind of double complexity which has been developing in this field might be similar to the blockchain question in a way, only that the blockchain now is a certificate which is entering the digital domain, and it's no longer on paper. So you have it wholly embedded in a digital domain. But I think nobody does it until now. So are you an artist yourself? So go for it.
I mean, it is interesting to think about whether how central or peripheral a certificate is to a work. I mean, whether it's, in conceptual terms, something that is extremely central, or whether it's a marketing device. And therefore, in a sense, more about the traditional notion of authentication as opposed to a set of instructions. But certainly, there are issues that the Przanski-Sigalov contract that got a lot of press in the early 70s, and only Hans Hake has ever used it in a consistent way. It's there is a problem of how one keeps a set of instructions attached to the work. And I know that there have been some discussions of blockchain in relation to authors' resale royalty enforcement. But I think that in a sense, the kind of question you were raising was a question of the degree to which the certificate is something that the artist is playing with. And then essentially, certificate as work in the sense that the artist is investing a kind of playful creativity into the certificate, as well as, and that is, in a sense, not just certifying the work, but in a sense, in that partly about the making of the work. Are we at time? So we're done? Okay. I think we have rather unceremoniously finished.